Hi there. I was reading Compelling Reason by C.S. Lewis. It's a collection of essays. There's many versions of these essays in different entitled books that have come out over the last 60 or so years. This is an essay called Modern Translations of the Bible, 1947. He put this forth as the introduction to JB Phillips' Letters to Young Churches, a translation of the New Testament epistles, which was a fragment, of course, of what became ultimately Phillips' English translation of the New Testament, a favorite of many. And Lewis wrote the intro, and here it is. I'll read part of it today, and the next part having to do with St. Paul specifically in the next video. Lewis says, keep in mind this is 1947, before most of the modern translations came forth, but there were a number of them coming out after the revised version of the 1880s came forth. A number of independent translations before the committees started doing their thing in the 1950s, right up till today. So Lewis starts off, it is possible that the reader who opens this volume on the counter of a bookshop, that is Phillips' volume, may ask himself why we need a new translation of any part of the Bible. And if of any, why of the epistles? Do we not already possess, it may be said, in the Authorized version, the most beautiful rendering which any language can boast? Some people whom I have met go even further and feel that a modern translation is not only unnecessary, but even offensive. They cannot bear to see the time-honored words altered. It seems to them irreverent. There are several answers to such people. In the first place, the kind of objection which they feel to a new translation is very like the objection which was once felt to any English translation at all. Dozens of sincerely pious people in the 16th century shuddered at the idea of turning the time-honored Latin of the Vulgate into our common, and as they thought, barbarous English. A sacred truth seemed to them to have lost its sanctity when it was stripped of the polysyllabic Latin, long heard at Mass and at hours, and put into language such as men do use, language steeped in all the commonplace associations of the nursery, the inn, the stable, and the street. The answer then was the same as the answer now. The only kind of sanctity which Scripture can lose, or at least New Testament Scripture, by being modernized, is an accidental kind which it never had for its writers or its earliest readers. The New Testament, in the original Greek, is not a work of literary art. It is not written in a solemn ecclesiastical language. It is written in the sort of Greek which was spoken over the Eastern Mediterranean after Greek had become an international language, and therefore lost its real beauty and subtlety. In it, we see Greek used by people who have no real feeling for Greek words, because Greek words are not the words they spoke when they were children. It is a sort of basic Greek, a language without roots in the soil, a utilitarian, commercial, and administrative language. Does this shock us? It ought not to, except as the Incarnation itself ought to shock us. The same divine humility which decreed that God should become a baby at a peasant woman's breast, and later an arrested field preacher in the hands of the Roman police, decreed also that he should be preached in a vulgar, prosaic, and unliterary language. If you can stomach the one, you can stomach the other. The Incarnation is, in that sense, an irreverent doctrine. Christianity, in that sense, an incurably irreverent religion. When we expect that it should have come before the world in all the beauty that we now feel in the Authorized version, we are as wide of the mark as the Jews were in expecting that the Messiah would come as a great earthly king. The real sanctity, the real beauty and sublimity of the New Testament, as of Christ's life, are of a different sort, miles deeper or further in. In the second place, the Authorized version has ceased to be a good, that is, a clear, translation. It is no longer modern English. The meanings of words have changed. The same antique glamour which has made it, in the superficial sense, so beautiful, so sacred, so comforting, and so inspiring, has also made it in many places unintelligible. Thus where St. Paul says, I know nothing against myself. It translates, I know nothing by myself. That was a good translation, although even then rather old-fashioned in the 16th century. To the modern reader, it means either nothing or something quite different from what St. Paul said. The truth is that if we are to have translation at all, we must have periodical retranslation. There's no such thing as translating a book into another language once and for all, for a language is a changing thing. If your son is to have clothes, it is no good buying him a suit once and for all. He will grow out of it and have to be reclothed. And finally, though it may seem a sour paradox, we must sometimes get away from the Authorized version, if for no other reason, simply because it is so beautiful and so solemn. Beauty exalts, but beauty also lulls. Early associations endear, but they also confuse. Through that beautiful solemnity, the transporting or horrifying realities of which the book tells may come to us blunted and disarmed, and we may only sigh with tranquil veneration when we ought to be burning with shame or struck dumb with terror or carried out of ourselves by ravishing hopes and adorations. Does the word scourged really come home to us like flogged? Does mocked him sting like jeered at him? So in the next segment, Lewis looks at the seeming contradictions between Paul and Christ, the common misconception, even in his day, in the let's say in the era of the two wars, the misconception being that somehow Paul had perverted the teachings of Christ, so that the creator of Christianity, according to this new thought, was Paul, not Christ. So Lewis looks at the issue of this seeming disparity between these two types of Christianity in reference to the contribution that new translations make to solving this misunderstanding and clearing up some of the paradoxes or contrasts between the epistles of the New Testament and the teachings of the Gospels. Next time. We'll put a link in right now, though, to a nice little essay Lewis did on why the Old Testament reveals nothing of the afterlife. Nothing is an exaggeration. Very little of the afterlife. Why this contrast between the religion of the Old Testament and the religion of the surrounding pagan nations?